Hey, we are going to find out today that there are 4 things that you could be doing or doing incorrectly that actually result in a huge deficit in your body's ability to be able to add muscle. And we're going to find out that in your 40s, in your 50s or 60s or beyond, that not only is it possible to add muscle naturally, you should be adding muscle naturally, and the science shows us that it's very achievable and very doable. So if you haven't, take a quick second, subscribe to the channel, like the video. That just helps us out. We are putting out a pile of great content and good information for you, both inspirational, motivational, and informational. And we'll be right back. You know, there's a really common misconception that once you're in your 40s or your 50s or even your 60s, that you are not going to add muscle anymore, that your muscle building days are behind you and your best days are behind you. But in reality, the science shows us, and the research and the empirical evidence of people doing the work shows us that that's just not the case. And, you know, we're talking today about how can I do some things to add muscle. I want to correct these things that people are getting wrong, that I might be getting wrong. And we're going to talk about 4 things that most people get wrong when it comes to adding muscle in their 40s. So let's get right into it. And we're going to start with mistake number 1, which is protein timing. So there's 2 parts to this. Number 1 is consuming enough protein. You know, there's something called anabolic resistance. That means as we age, our bodies become more resistant to synthesizing protein and using it for muscle. So the protein that we take in actually needs to go up, not down. We always talk about 1 gram of protein per pound of lean body weight that you have. Number 1, we have to make sure we're consuming enough of the protein. And now number 2, when we talk about protein timing, you know, the latest that I'm seeing here and the different things I'm looking at in studies and so forth is that if the optimal is to be somewhere around 40 grams of protein, 50 grams of protein per meal, and have it spread out over, you know, maybe it's 3 meals, maybe it's 4 meals, but it's in those bigger chunks so that your body can use that more effectively. Because again, as we're talking about, as we age, and our body's less effective in putting that protein to use. So we want to consume more of it each time, and we want to get it over the course of the day. And really, we're talking about, you know, somewhere in the 3 to 5 meals neighborhood. Like I'll use myself as an example. I generally consume 5 meals in a day. And with a steady protein intake for each one of those meals. And so that's number 1. So if you're, if you're not right on top of that as far as your protein intake, that's going to be a tough one for your body to add muscle in response to the training. So that's number 1. All right. Number 2 is training intensity. So just because we get older doesn't mean we back off on training intensity. There may be some things that we do different. Maybe we don't lift quite as heavy as we used to lift because of our joints, but there's ways to still train intensely. So let's talk about that. If we go to the gym and we just kind of go through the motions, I'm just doing some sets, I'm doing some reps of these exercises, but I'm never really putting my body under strain, like properly requiring it to, you know, really push or pull or whatever it might be. What happens is our bodies aren't going to respond to that with with muscle growth. So here's where we need to get to. We've talked about this in other episodes, where you want to get to somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 reps left when you stop. Now, maybe you go right to failure, and there's a time and a place for that. And I'll put the link to the video that we did a video on training to failure versus leaving some reps in reserve. But the point is, if in order for you to get to the reps in reserve of 2 at the end, it means that's been an intense set. You've worked hard for that set. So that's what we're talking about here, is that we're working hard when we go to the gym. Now, here's another thing. A rule of thumb is when we go to compound lifts, so bench press, the multi-joint exercises, bench press, deadlift, squats, shoulder press. That's really where we want to engage heavier weight and, try and get to that 2 reps left in the tank, some hard work and really hitting it. And if we're going to use lighter weight, the thing to keep in mind is it just requires more reps to get that same activation. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Isolation exercises are easier to get closer to failure. So, like arm curls, that's an isolation exercise. So you can get closer to failure. And so maybe you can do some more reps. Maybe you can lighten the weight a little bit, but just be aware of training intensity. Okay. All right. Number 3 is training volume. So here's the thing. When we talk about this too, about overtraining, but some people, they cut back on their training because they want to avoid overtraining. However, the research shows that as we age, we actually will see a lot of benefits from not doing that. So there was a meta-analysis done, and it showed that on training and volume, that in older men and women, that they saw those gains from keeping the volume up, and where increasing the volume maybe had less effect on the younger one. So it's interesting to see that the other thing about increasing volume is it also helps increase protein synthesis. So it's just something to keep in mind as far as that. Training volume is necessarily cutting it out just because we're getting older is not necessarily the way to go. Now, how can I apply this? Don't go and start making drastic changes on your training. So if you're maybe, okay, I'm going to increase volume where I've cut back on, I've cut back on sets or I've cut back on exercises. Just gradually do it. Your body will thank you. Okay. Mistake number 4 is recovery. Now, here's the one thing. The other things we're talking about is kind of counter to what people have just thought. Well, we shouldn't do as much. We shouldn't lift as much. We shouldn't be as intense in the gym as we age. Well, the research on all of those is quite the opposite. But here's the other part about training that we want to get to is recovery. This is the one thing that aging does affect, is your ability to recover from training and for muscle repair, because that's really what happens. We go to the gym, we work out, we put our bodies under stress, then we go back home, and as we eat and do these different things, our body will recover. So a couple of key things we want to talk about, 3, as we talk about recovery. And the first one is your rest time between sets. So the research shows that 3 minutes is better than 1 minute for muscle growth when it comes to resting between sets. And there was one that showed 5 minutes is even more optimal when it comes to rest time between sets. Now, here's the thing to keep in mind. You might find that that's completely unrealistic if you're taking 5 minutes between sets, because you don't want to be there for the whole day, right? Working out at the gym. So you have to figure out how to fit that into your schedule. But by giving yourself a little bit more time between sets, it's going to be better for your body's recovery. It's going to be better for your, ultimately for your muscle gain. Okay. Number 2, rest between training sessions. And this one's a big one, because really you should be 24 to 48 hours between any muscle group before you do it again. And the other thing about that, these are just general, parameters. But the other thing is, if you're sore, let's say you did chest a few days ago and you're scheduled to do chest today and your chest is still sore, don't go and do chest. Take another day off, because that's a good indication that your body still needs to recover. It's still, is still going through that healing process. And one of the things about rest and recovery is it is somewhat individualized. So you need to figure out what is your body's sweet spot. What is the time that typically works for rest time, for in between workout time, and all of these things. So take the time to figure that out, but that will help you a lot. Okay, number 3 is sleep. Now, we've talked about sleep a lot on this channel and the importance of sleep. But you know what some of the studies, and I'm going to put the link to the sleep episode in here as well. But here, let me just give you some of the studies that they found that men that slept less than 6 hours had a 14% drop in testosterone. And there was another study that was done that a 5-hour sleep, where the group was sleeping 5 hours, they had a 15% drop in testosterone. And so the sleep is so important for obviously, for our testosterone, for our body to heal. It's also super important just for our mental facilities. And here's the other thing. Here's an interesting thing. Did you know that your brain basically resets memories while we sleep? But that happens while we're getting enough sleep and quality sleep. So, okay. So those are the 4 things. Okay. So not optimizing protein timing, not training with enough intensity, reducing training volume unnecessarily, and not getting enough recovery time. So is it one of those? Maybe it's all of those. Maybe you can tweak everything. You know, as I was looking at this, I really started to think about, okay, what is my sleep time like? And am I really getting enough sleep? And there's been some studies that say 6 to 8 hours. I've seen some that say 7 to 9 hours. And I've always said, for me, it's kind of trying to get to 7 hours is the number that works best for me. And I can tell from how my body responds. And sometimes, you'll find out when you start getting the nods in the middle of the day. Sometimes it's a calorie thing, a blood sugar thing, but other times it's your body saying you need to be getting more sleep. It needs more rest. Okay. So those are the 4, and you can start to implement them, like I said, right away, because here's the thing. It's interesting to me that as I looked at these studies and looked at these different things, that these are things that they said, as you age, they as in the general, people. I had somebody tell me once, and somebody told Ruth once that, once you're over 40, you can't gain muscle, and especially not naturally. And so this research is pretty unequivocal that you certainly can gain muscle, and you should be adding muscle as you age in your 40s, in your 50s, in your 60s. And we've talked about the importance of that and what muscle will do for you and for your metabolism and all of these things. So grab a hold of that and run with that. If you haven't, please take a minute and subscribe to the channel. Appreciate you hanging in here with us and watching through to the end. And we'll see you next time.